Welcome back. Day 27 then of Hammerween, and we find ourselves rounding off vampire weekends. I very much enjoyed doing them. I hope some of you, at least, have enjoyed watching these mini-series as part of the larger series. When I realised early in the month there were 5 Tuesdays, that was a natural to do the 5 Nigel Neils. And when I realised there were 8 Hammer vampire movies not featuring Dracula, it was also natural to do those on the weekends. So Vampire Weekend was born. It did mean, of course, that we'll be making our one and only venture in this series, at least, into New Hammer, the revived Hammer, the Simon Oakes era of Hammer, who revived it in the 2000s and lost control in 2023, now been taken over by John Gore, who partially responsible for Dr. Jekyll's acquisition earlier this year. We won't go into it. Anyway, we will stick to formula. We will do synopsis and then review, as always. Just because it's a newer movie doesn't mean we're going to radically change what we do here. So, 2010, directed by Matt Reeves, who's coming off Cloverfield, so a big hit movie there, and would go on to a massive career, wouldn't he? Oh, War for the Planet of the Apes, not Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, yep, and Batman with Robert blah blah blah. So huge career coming up from Matt Reeves, but again, he's already coming off of Cloverfield, so really a big way for Hammer to kick off. But the film didn't do that well. But we'll go into that. Plot then. March 1983, Los Alamos, New Mexico. A disfigured man is admitted to the hospital where he's questioned by Police Detective Lieutenant Sergeant Frank Drebin. No, Elias Koteas from Crash. Oh, he's a good actor, Elias Koteas. He doesn't get anything to do here, but he's a bloody good actor. Who tries to question him about a recent murder. Question the disfigured man. The detective gets called away outside the room to take a phone call. And while that happens, while the detective takes the call, we follow him. The disfigured man jumps out the window, commits suicide, leaving the suicide note, "I'm sorry, Abby." 2 weeks back the way we head then. It's one of those films where we give you something exciting and then 2 weeks earlier, which I'm not always a big fan of that plot device, but thankfully it doesn't take too long to catch up to the 2 week point. We meet Owen, who's a very depressed 12-year-old boy that is there. And he's been terribly bullied at school. Not in the just a little bit of teasing. I mean, to the point that he's, I think, quite disturbed himself. He has fantasies. He poses in front of the mirror wearing like, a mask and imagining himself stabbing the school bullies and whatnot. So he's really quite disturbed and he's really taken this very, very badly. He's getting no help from his religious mother. The father's not to be seen. He's divorced and just calls every so often to argue with the parent, with the mother, it seems. He sees moving into his apartment complex, I guess you'd call him, over there, a young girl about his age and an older man played by the wonderful Richard Jenkins, presumably the father. So he thinks, maybe a friend. But she, the young girl, when meeting him, says, "We can't be friends," and just kind of leaves it there. So, plot intrigue. Why is she saying that? The bullies come back and continue to harass Owen, who even gets to the point of buying a knife to try and really go dark. It gets quite horrendous, but he does let on to Abby, who gives him a second chance. Though she said we can't be friends, he's sitting playing with a Rubik's cube, and it shows her how to work it and what it is. She's got no idea, which is a kind of hint towards what's happening, really, if you didn't already guess, rather obviously, I think, especially with the poster. Um, she gets the Rubik's Cube, and thanks for that. I like puzzles. And he confides in her that he's been bullied at school, and she says you have to. You have to hit back. But what if they hit me? Then you hit them harder again. You hit harder every single time. You do not stop. You beat them. You win. So she gives him a real pep talk, and they become very close. She seems to have no real friends, no sense of happiness about her, and he obviously doesn't either. So it's almost as if they've both found their confidant, their new friend, their only friend, and they're in such a place like Los Alamos, New Mexico, in the freezing winter. I mean, we think of it as like Oppenheimer in the summertime, but in the winter it's freezing cold with inches and inches and inches of snow. And it's a cold environment for a very cold and frosty atmosphere between all the characters in the movie, slightly warmed up by the young leads here who have a kindling of a new relationship, a new friendship. So they start communicating via Morse code through the walls, etc. Um, the Richard Jenkins character, Thomas, he abducts a local teenage girl and drains the blood into a jug, posing as a almost a slasher villain the way he's dressed up. But he spills all the contents. So that is, of course, blood that's meant for the vampire. Is he the vampire? No, Abby's the vampire. Abby has to attack one of the neighbors in the complex. There's a few scenes where we see Owen looking out his bedroom window with a telescope, very much Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window with his binoculars. That sinister guy over there killed his wife. But we kind of know these characters, even though we've never met them, just because it's the characters that Owen's been spying on because he's got absolutely no people in his life whatsoever. Um, Abby attacks a neighbor in that complex, as I said, drinks the blood and forces a very angry Richard Jenkins to dispose of the body. He loses his temper with him. He has to go out again the next night, Richard Jenkins, to do the same. So it's obvious this vampire needs to feed quite often. But he's discovered. He gets in a struggle with the teenager that he's tried to abduct this time because it all goes awry when two teenagers get into the car. Struggle ensues, and he, rather amazingly, burns sulfuric acid onto his face so that he becomes unrecognizable and the police won't be able to trace him back to Abbey. So we'll come back to that when I kind of go into the more. So Abby finds out what happens and visits him, and we start at the back at the beginning of the film then. We see that she's actually able to fly like a, more silly vampire, but she never turns into a bat. But we hear wings, but we only see the after effect. But we do see her hovering at a window, but we don't see the legs hovering. So it's a very conscious decision to make it as real, quote unquote, as possible. She drinks his blood, and they have an embrace before he's going to die. He knows that anyway after the sulfuric acid incident, and he willingly gives his last blood to her, almost to say, "Take mine, so you don't need to kill anyone else tonight." Owen is awakened by Abby, who says, "You have to let me in. You have to invite me in because if it doesn't happen, then if you don't invite me in, then I will start to bleed from my head," which comes back later in the film in a short way. She takes all her clothes off, which is an odd development for the film, but I promise you it's done in the most chaste and most innocent way possible, where it really just comes across as two prepubescent children who don't really know anything about anything to do with her. So it's very innocent, it's very naive, and it's charming in a strange way. So they really are committing to each other, even though neither of them really knows what that kind of means. They just feel it. They feel something, and it's not even urges. They're not at that stage yet. But Owen decides, well, we've become such good friends now. I'll show you my secret hiding place in the building. And what do friends do, especially in the 1980s, before they knew better about blood diseases? They make a blood oath, don't they? The blood pact. So he cuts himself and goes to ask her to do the same and then make a blood oath. When she sees the blood on the floor, she turns into the vampire creature for the first time that we see, and she drinks from the floor, disgusting and repelling Owen. It's quite something. Um, the next night, she comes to him and says, "Yes, I am a vampire. Thomas wasn't my father. Richard Jenkins wasn't my father." Owen looks about the apartment and sees some like old-timey photographs of Richard Jenkins as a young boy, about his age, with her, with Abby, when she was very young as well, still the same age. So she says, "Yep, I'm 12 years old now, and that's true. I've never lied to you, but I'll always be 12 years old. I won't age like people like you." So we can make some extrapolations about the relationship with Richard Jenkins from that, but we'll go into that as well. The next night, Owen sneaks out to spend the night in her place, her little flat, where she's now living herself, obviously. The detective comes back, Elias Koteas, having kind of traced some steps, and so the other person has been attacked. So narrowing it down, there's only so many people that have been attacked, and it all points back to this one complex. Detective forces his way into the only apartment that's dodgy, which is the one that Abby's in, and finds her asleep. Owen makes a distraction. Abby wakes up and kills Elias Koteas's detective, who we saw at the start of the film. She decides from then on, Abby, that she's obviously too dangerous to stay with Owen. As she said from the start, we can't be friends, and decides to leave town. And that's not the end of the film. There's a good 20 minutes left after that. And guess what? Catchphrase this month, I'm not going to spoil what happens. Because, again, is it underseen? Maybe. I don't know modern stuff as well as most. But regardless, I think I should leave it there because it goes to some interesting places. So, elephant in the room, our young stars here are proper stars. That's Chloe Grace Moretz. She's just coming off a major hit already as a hit girl in Kick-Ass. She'd go on to a major career over the next decade and change, and that is Colby Schmidt McPhee, who is coming off a hit as well with The Road with Viggo Mortensen, and will go on to another big career. He was a Nightcrawler in the kind of young X-Men films that they were making in the 2010s, and he was in one of my favorite westerns of the last 25 years, Slow West with Michael Fassbender. A brilliant film. So both our leads and our director have had massive hits before this and are going to have massive success after this. So very different for the kind of stuff we're talking about here on Hammerween, where it's this person did a Blake Seven once. No, these are proper Hollywood stars with a proper Hollywood director before and after this project. Their relationship is crucial to the whole thing. If their chemistry doesn't work, the whole film falls apart. Happily, it works perfectly. Now, elephant in the room time. Have you seen the original? Let the Right One In? I have, and I have a major issue with this film, and that is it's the same movie. In fact, there's more happening. There's a few more subplots in Let the Right One In. So Matt Reeves does not deserve a writing credit because he basically translates the script and nothing else. There's nothing in this. Beat for beat, it is the same film. But I'm not going to penalise that for this because we're exploring the Hammer filmography rather than exploring it as a remake. So it should be noted that you don't really need to see both. But for me, the Swedish version is better, but this is obviously more accessible for a widespread audience. Richard Jenkins, then, who I think has one of the most interesting characters in the film, even though he doesn't do terribly much. What a wonderful way to set it up. So we think he's the vampire's father. So is he the head vampire? Or is he the father who has a vampiric daughter and he just has to get her blood, but he's not a vampire himself? Well, actually, as I said, it turns out he's been with her since he was Owen's age. So it is kind of putting a new slant on the old trope in almost every vampire film. from Hammer and Universal of, like Clove, the vampire's assistant, like Igor for Baron Frankenstein, that kind of thing, where she's got her own assistant, but they've had a very different relationship over the decades, the many decades. And potentially it's caused a lot of resentment and a massive change in their dynamic over that time, where they're both reliant on each other. There clearly was a lot of love at the start. They look very happy together in the original pictures that we see, just like Owen and she do, which is why she's convinced that she can't stay and be friends with Owen or go into a relationship with Owen. Because, I mean, in 5 years' time, he's going to look like he's going out with a 12-year-old, so that's not going to work. In 10 years' time, he's going to go to jail for that kind of behavior. And what does it do over 40, 50 years? What would that do to him to wear him down every day of looking after this vampire 12-year-old when he's 55 and he's not got those urges anymore? He's got very different urges and they don't involve 12-year-old girls. So I think the Richard Jenkins character is the key to all of this, being a kind of deeper and more interesting film than it could be without his involvement. Not just because he's a great actor, but because of the character, the meta use of the vampire's assistant, and just the way that it's all structured around not the mystery or the reveal, because it's not cheap like that, but the revelation of their relationship kind of towards the third act. Cody Smith McPhee is brilliant in those scenes where he's being bullied, and you completely buy everything he's going through, and you buy him as he doesn't know what to do. He's being contrasted with, he keeps bypassing televisions and radios that are playing Ronald Reagan's Enemies at the Gate, or whatever it was, speech, talking about how the enemy is at the door and it's out there. And as long as America's okay, as long as the home's okay, everything will be fine. Well, for this boy, for Owen, the home is not okay. The home is lonely and sad with a religious, fanatical mother who kind of leaves him alone a lot. She looks after him, but she's not very attentive. His father's away. He's got no friends. And when he goes to school, ostensibly a place to learn and make friends, all he finds is bullying and hatred. So it's slightly mocking the ideal of Ronald Reagan trying to sell Reaganomics and the values of the time to America, saying, "Really, is that how America shapes up, Ronnie?" When this little American boy, hmm, the only friend he can find in the world, has to drink a gallon of blood every single night. So really interesting stuff there. Chloe Grace Moretz sells the tragedy of the vampire. That's the route this film goes down. The horrible nature of having to survive as a vampire, how monotonous your days and nights would be, how careful you'd need to be, how much you would need to move, a bit like Near Dark from the 80s. A shout out to Peter Kerr, one of his favourite films we talked about on his channel, which I'll be posting a link hopefully soon when he posts the video. Might be up by the time this is up. We talked about Tangerine Dream soundtracks. But in Near Dark, they kind of explore that idea of the vampires being almost willing to die because they've just got nothing more to live for, but they ultimately can't die. They can't commit suicide, walk into the sun, etc. That's very much the Grace Moretz character here. She wants to die. She's desperate and lonely, but you can't die. It's part of the curse. You have to keep going and keep finding victims. Yeah, I mean, Carla Bono from Stranger Things is in here as Owen's mother, but that's really the main cast that you need to talk about. It's Cody Smith McPhee, Chloe Grace Moretz, Richard Jenkins, and a little bit of Elias Koteas. Matt Reeves does a brilliant job directing it. It looks great. It's a bit lazy. I mean, I've talked about how the remake doesn't need to happen, but I think it's very lazy to say, well, that was in Sweden, snow. So I know what I'll do. We'll find an American place with snow. I think that's very lazy. I mean, you have to find someone with darkness quite a lot of the time, but I don't know why you would. why you would pick a place that famously has a lot of daylight as well in New Mexico. You'd think you would head up to Minnesota or something if that was the case. So again, I do not know why Matt Reeves has got sole credit in the screenwriting here because he did nothing, absolutely nothing. So this film is the first one out the gates for Hammer's revival, and it was a brilliant idea to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't work with the public. It didn't pay off. The film was one of the 10 lowest grossers of the year from a major studio. 20 million budget, only returned 27, so it made a loss because you need to make about two and a half times your budget for to beat production costs and whatnot. So it didn't work ultimately. It would be the Women in Black remake that really brought Hammer back and really gave them a name again. But it was all such a false dawn, wasn't it? They kept kind of pushing on, but never really cracking through with that revival of Hammer under Simon Ox. Hopefully, with John Gore, they can start producing a lot more with Gore, and we can start enjoying a lot more Hammer in the future. But yeah, I think that's just about all we really need to cover on this for this film. Again, very different, very different. Although I would like to call out one of the producers. Well, I need to get her name for you. I don't usually use notes, excuse me. Donna Golgotti. She was challenged on, so why are you remaking it, kind of thing. Perfectly valid question. And she said, well, the original isn't exactly Lawrence of Arabia. Fuck you. Absolutely fuck you. So you're basically saying because it's not an absolute epic that everybody in the granny has seen, that you can just remake it. Doesn't matter. I mean, you can remake it, but come up with something a bit better than that, you absolute Hollywood shill. Anyway, so a bit of a false dawn for Hammer. Michael Giacchino has a good score here where he weaves in different themes for the two characters. Both are full of loneliness and isolation, but Owen's is more 80s and hers is more old-fashioned. So again, musical storytelling from a composer who I don't always like, Giacchino. Although I like his Star Trek work with the new Star Trek films, but hey, not talking about Star Trek yet. Maybe we will, I don't know. Star Trek Christmas, anybody? Well, again, this has run ridiculously long for one of these, hasn't it? Because I've not done a modern one before. But we cover very little modern stuff on here anyway. So there's no blueprint here. With that in mind, I'll call it quits there. This is a highly recommended film if you haven't seen the original. If you have, and it's been a while, definitely see it anyway because you'll want to see these two performances, which are absolutely top tier. But if you have recently seen the Swedish one, give it a year or two. Absolutely give it a year or two because it doesn't add anything new. Doesn't add anything new. But these two are mm, mm. This one of the most underrated Hammer vampires. She's brilliant. She's amazing. Him, brilliant Hammer hero. Brilliant. All right, folks. I shall see you tomorrow. Oh, we're coming up to the end, last few days, for day 28 of Hammerween with ooh, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde with Ralph Bates and Martine Basic. I'll see you then, but until I do, don't have nightmares.